One.
The flag.
Flag.
We'll get that before 7. All right, and the microphones are on.
Okay. Mr. Introduce your folks.
We have David Stroud and Ken, I do not know, Ash. They're with Wood. They did an island-wide drainage study for the city of Folly Beach, and they are going to present their findings to you. You should have the PowerPoint in your packet, and they also have a very long report that staff has. They will summarize it.
And before these guys get started, just to give it a little more context, this did not appear out of the blue. Back in 2017, we did the sea level rise adaptation report, and also in our comp plan, we talked about an island-wide drainage study. So this is actually the product that is accomplishing one of the goals of another long-term plan we did. So this is our long-term planning and option. This is the work product that we asked for. COVID kind of put it on pause for a little bit, but I'm excited to hear what these guys have to say.
You know, while they're getting ready, a little housekeeping for the council folks. Because of this straight shot that I'm not gonna be able to see everybody. So going forward, if you want to speak, we're gonna follow parliamentary procedure. You get recognized by the chair to speak. So we're not talking 40 people talking over each other at one time. So if I don't see you, you raise your hand, go, excuse me, you know, but we will keep it going without confusion. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, council members and mayor and Aaron, city manager now, for allowing us to come and explain this island-wide drainage study that we did on behalf of the request from the town. If you look at your packet, we do have an agenda. It's just going to be short because I know we got 30 minutes, but what we really want to do is kind of review what the scope of the project was. And then look at what are some obstacles to actual workable solutions out front. And then look at the drainage system modeling and methodology, what we use for methodology and modeling. And then what the results were. And I think it's important to point out that this is a high-level study with some information that is consistent through the modeling. However, it's not the detailed analysis you would need for individual projects. It gives you a level of understanding of here's what the problem is, here's how we can solve it. But in terms of getting the detailed costs, we do have in the back of the staff report, a large document, there is some costing there for materials, etc. But once you get into the actual projects, then that's where the real investigation on exactly how much today it's going to cost versus when we did this in 2019. So let's move on to slide number 4 and on the project scope. We really were assessed in this RFP with assessing the existing stormwater drainage system. Obviously, Charleston County controls most of the drainage system that's on the island. And then we wanted to develop some conceptual improvements to try to alleviate some of the drainage issues and problems that we've been experiencing over a long period of time. So what we did in terms of what we call a design storm, we looked at a 10-year design storm, which is consistent with what Charleston County designs the stormwater system here on the island under that particular guidance. So we used that 10-year design storm, but we adjusted it for future rainfall that is supposed to expand over time. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then also the climate change impacts, speed, sea level rise, etc. We did also look at king tides as well. So that just gives you an idea of part of the scope. And then beyond that, in terms of the data we used or collected, we obviously got data from Charleston County on the existing system that they had in place. What I will say as we go on, in their GIS data, their shape files, there was some data that was missing. So we had to go out in the field, collector app we developed and actually collect additional data in the field that was missing from the Charleston County stormwater shapefiles that they provided to us. We also did an open house with citizen input, interviews. We also looked at the city's flooding information that they provided to us. And then we come up with some recommended capital improvement CIP projects as a result of this study. So on slide number 7, in terms of, this picture was taken by Eric, I think on East Cooper Street. It's in one of the pictures that was on the My Coast site, so he really has taken a lot of photos in Folly Beach that was really helpful in us for understanding some other flooding issues that we might not have noticed through the modeling process. So we did notice from some obstacles, in terms of the drainage system on the island, there is some inadequate and disconnected drainage and piping systems. In other words, sometimes there's a ditch that begins and ends with no outlet on either side. There's piping that does not always connect and go to the appropriate outfall. So there's minimal area. Obviously, it's very highly developed for any retention that might be used on the island, a very high water table. And there was no previous comprehensive study or recommendations to work from. So that's the other component we looked at. So if you look to slide number 8, this is where we noted from both the city and from other folks as to where the chronic flooding problems are. This is not to say that there aren't flooding issues elsewhere, but these are the highest ones that we saw and noticed and provided to us. In terms of slide number 9, from a flooding perspective, as you know, anytime you have heavy rainfall, and we're talking about rainfall that's not over a short period of time, coastal storms, king tides, and high water table all make it possible that the drainage system cannot handle that amount of rainfall. It just simply can't. So when you have high tide, you have a lot of rainfall, the water can't go out, and it's collecting in streets, it's collecting in lots, and it's running across lots. So we do have impassable streets, we have flooding to adjacent lots on streets, and we have flooding to non-elevated buildings. So those are 3 important aspects of what the flooding problems do on a daily or weekly or monthly or yearly basis. So if we go on to slide number 11, if we look at just what the existing conditions, what we call existing conditions modeling, came out to be. Obviously, we want to be consistent with Charleston County because they have done all of the drainage improvements, well, I should say all the drainage improvements and stormwater improvements on the island to date. So from existing conditions, we looked at, as I mentioned, a 10-year, 24-hour design storm. And through the Soil Conservation Service distribution graphs, that came out to be 7 inches of rainfall over a 24-hour period. So that's the existing conditions rainfall on the island. We validated that data with a storm that occurred on November 18th, 2018 in Charleston, and that amount of rainfall, just slightly higher, was found during that storm. So we validated the model based on that 2018 storm. Then we look on slide number 12. That's where we look at proposed conditions. So once again, we use that 10-year, 24-hour design storm. We increased 20% rainfall from the climate change impacts, and that came out to be about 8.4 inches of rainfall over a 24-hour period. So we want to make sure that we actually increased it so that we know in the future, if you have more rainfall, we want the system to be able to at least adapt to that in the future. So slide 13 is the tidal data. So this is the data from DHEC, from the site My Coast, where the king tide from DHEC is 6.6 feet above what's called the mean lower water level, or approximately 3.45 feet NAVD 88. So 3.45 feet is the king tide average for Folly Beach. And that was used as an outlet condition for the modeling in the study. Slide 14 shows from the NOAA moderate range sea level rise projections that if you had 1 foot of sea level rise, that would impact 33 buildings on the island. 2 feet of sea level rise would impact 219 buildings. Now, impacting means water under it, or if they're not elevated, water in it. And then 3 feet would be 531 buildings. Now, obviously, that's a long-range projection, but it gets you thinking about what the impacts of sea level rise can be on actual structures. So we mapped it, we looked at that, and you see on some of the slides, you see the red dots, those are impacted buildings based on a certain level of sea level rise. So, as I mentioned, we had to do some data collection because Charleston County's data was not complete, drainage system. They had put the system in, they hadn't digitized it, we didn't get the resulting shape files. So we had to go out and do some ground truthing to make sure that we collected all of the conduits, inlets, junction boxes that were missing from the Charleston County data. So we found 49 sites through that ground truthing that was missed by Charleston County in their GIS data. So we included it in the modeling, and then on slide 16, it shows you the locations of where we found that missing data. Either missing data or data that was not complete totally. So we had to capture either the depth of the invert of the pipe or the junction box and see which direction the pipes go, because there might have been a missing conduit on one of the GIS systems. So that was a collection effort that we did to get the most complete picture of what the drainage system was. On September 17th of 2019, we held an open house in the former council chamber. And there are some vendors here from, I believe, College of Charleston and a couple other vendors, as well as us. We had maps of all the drainage areas of complaints and the whole map of the island. People came in, we had questionnaires. We did get 10 responses, 9 of them had actual entries on them. So just to give you a perspective on slide number 17, 3 of the 9 had flooding in their front yard from a ditch. 2 of them had also flooding from a drainage inlet, and 2 of them had coastal erosion problems or issues. So depth of water was one of the questions, and for the first respondent, they saw at least 6 inches and up to 2 feet of water on their lot. Second respondent, 6 to 9 inches. The third response, flooded streets. The fourth, no problem. Fifth response, 1 to 3 feet of water, and then so on. But what I would note is number 9, they have only seen 5 or 6 inches of water. So it sort of ranges from, nothing to 3 feet of water on lots, up to 3 feet, from those responses that we got. And just some comments, as you can see on slide number 18, that person had 6 inches of water impacts during heavy rainfall events, most consistently, and then up to 2 feet during hurricane or other type of larger coastal events. And then other comments, the water lasting more than 24 hours on their lot. Some reported no water issues. There was a lot of comments about stormwater gets stuck on the corner of 4th and East Indian, and it just going under East Indian to the river gets clogged. And during tropical storms, water can rise up to 3 feet. And roadside ditches are needed. That was one of the comments. And then a couple other comments. Water overflows 13th Street behind East Ashley toward Tabby Drive. That's sort of a chronic area. And water also comes to Tabby Drive from the river. So in 2 spots, water's coming in that location on Tabby Drive. So that just gives you a perspective of some of the comments we got as a part of that survey and open house. In terms of the flooding analysis and really what we were looking at, we sort of described part of this, but from the criteria we used, obviously we talked about flooding confirmed by the city, the 10-year model. What we came to say is flooding depths greater than 6 inches in the existing conditions model meant there was a flood condition prevalent. So anything we saw 6 inches or more meant that there was flooding on that water in that area. And looking at the number of parcels affected or impacted, and then any critical community infrastructure affected or impacted. What we did see from some of the common causes of flooding, that the conduit or the piping drainage did not always align with the natural relief of the ground, or what we call the digital elevation model, the LIDAR. The conduits not often contain enough storage volume or steep enough slope, and obviously we're very flat, but that does not allow for quick drainage relief. And then in some places, there's no drainage system in place at all. So you're relying on just ground. And we know that obviously undeveloped ground, you get better flow of less water off and soaking in, but anything that's developed, you're going to get more runoff. So combine that with the tidal flows, high tides, and the outfalls, preventing stormwater from draining out. So it gets stuck and it has nowhere to go. So we did use what we call PC Swim. It's a personal computer stormwater management model. It's a 2-dimensional model. We validated it, used as dimensions of 20 storm, and then we based on future conditions those capital improvements in that 4 inches of rainfall from that future conditions model. So if you go on to slide number 23, all conduits were modeled with what we call an entry and exit loss coefficient of 0.2. They're also modeled with those tidal effects at 3.5, king tide, sea level rise, NAVD 88. Also, we looked at about 383 hydraulically independent, what we call sub-catchment basins or sub-areas. So when you model, you have to look at where the drainage goes, and so you have to develop small sub-watersheds within the larger watershed. And then the maximum water depth, as I mentioned, based on those volume of runoff, anything 6 inches or greater was, as I mentioned, a flood condition. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken, who's going to talk a little bit about the results.
Any questions so far for what David talked about? Okay. So if you look at slide 26, I know it's going to be small on your slide deck, but it's just another image showing what the existing stormwater system looks like. You've got the street view that you're used to seeing on Google or MapQuest, if you still use MapQuest. The dark black is the existing pipe system and ditch system. And if you move up to slide 27, it's looking kind of to the west or south side of the island. If you go to Center Street and start heading right on Ashley, where we proposed, what the modeling suggested that some improvements are needed. We didn't color code that to show you where it would be pipes or it would be ditches. It's just showing that bright green is where additional conveyance is needed, whether it's pipes or ditches. So quite a bit of improvement needed. If you think about going down Ashley, there's really no stormwater system up there. Most of the lots are higher than the road. The water just comes down and sits in the road, as you know. So there needs to be a way to move that off. If you look on the other side of the island, heading to the east, same type of image, slide 28. The black heavy lines are the existing stormwater system, and the bright green are where we're suggesting improvements are needed. Some places it's picking up where there's not any pipes, and there's also some places where the improvements are replacements or add-ons to the existing pipes that are there. And so the next few slides, starting with slide 29, are just looking at certain areas by streets. We started with Tabby Drive, but that was kind of easy. You look at the image on the right, that's how the model looks at things. That blue is where water will be, more than 6 inches. We believe that if you put some ditching in to help water get down to the piping system, the pipes that are there are adequate. and that would help get water off the street. It kind of sits down that dead end street. If you move to slide 30, we're getting up to East Cooper, Erie, and Seacrest. We flipped the images. The flooding that's existing is on the left. You can see there's quite a bit of area that the model predicts there to be flooding. We did validate based on the input we got. And if you look on the right, you see there's only a little bit of black on there, and that's the existing pipe, which means we're either adding additional pipe or upping the size or adding ditches to help move water out of there. So that's it's not a redo in the area, but it's, you know, approaching half a mile of new pipes and more than half a mile of new ditches to try to pick that water up and move it out. And it's a flat area. The pipes are not sized large enough. And so moving to slide 31, it's around Erie and 8th Street. This is a spot where we think the pipes are adequate. Just need to connect the drainage, and the ponding areas through ditches to get it into the pipes. And so it's a little bit smaller improvement. There's a couple of those areas. Slide 32 is near downtown. If you look at the image on the left, you'll see a lot of flooding, a lot of blue at the top. The model, we didn't overlay the streets, but that's the marsh. That's not up on where the parcels are, where the lots are. And you'll see in the lower left of the corner, there's a kind of a straight line. That's the canal. But if you look around those, you can see the yellows, the existing pipes, and you can see the light blue, especially up towards Ashley, and as you get towards the beach on Center Street. Lots of flooding, lots of clean proof from that in the photos. And so naturally, if you look on the right, there's lots of piping that we suggest needed, almost 2 miles of pipe, to be honest with you. And some of that's putting in parallel pipes to help increase the size of the pipes. You're limited on how large the pipes can be based on the groundwater. So it's mostly undersized in this area. You've got lots of concrete. That adds to the problem. And then similarly, looking to the east, you know, you have problems along Ashley. Even though the flooding picture on the left doesn't show flooding on all the streets, there is flooding there. It's less than 6 inches, and we're suggesting pipes and ditches pretty much for the whole area to pick it up and carry it to the existing system and add some additional conveyance to carry it out there. That's quite a bit of piping as well, and about half a mile of ditches. And I'll skip Indian and Michigan just because that's stitching to try to get into the existing piping. The piping doesn't seem to be too undersized. Don't need to focus too much on that in the interest of time. And then the west of Ashley, which is on slide 35. Again, the image on the left has that deeper blue. That's the canal. You can see the yellow pipes are kind of pointed towards it. Just because there's water in the canal doesn't mean there's an issue. Mostly it's a matter of connecting existing pipes and getting some ditches together. No, excuse me, there's no ditches. It's stormwater pipes along Ashley connect into the existing outfalls to get water off that older part of the street that doesn't have any drainage on it already. So that's I went real quick, but that's, you know, summary. There's quite a bit of piping. Slide 36. It just goes into some detail about the fact that we do need some additional drainage. We do need to upgrade some pipes. I won't go through the details of what's the text that's on the slide, but that's consistent, just a summary of what we showed so far. If you go to slide 37, we're getting to the big slide in a second, and that's why David asked me to present. He didn't want to show the numbers. Slide 37 talks about some of the things you can do in addition to, potentially do in addition to the normal piping and outfall to the bay. Is you can consider underground storage. You can have the pipes have holes in them and exfiltrate. That has to be balanced with the groundwater table and the timing that goes with that. But you can gain a little bit of volume reduction, thus flooding reduction, but storing water in the pipes. There's a lot of information inside the report on green infrastructure, including stuff you actually can do on site, but also things that you can do with your ordinance to help prevent future problems. Things that can be done on the individual lots, what you can do instead of your classic concrete paving and things like that. So that's the summary of the items listed on 37, and the last slide is the summary of if you add all these items up, what the total cost would be. We did that by those areas we summarized that I just went through. But we did include the cost for doing the excavation, the cost for putting the pipes in. We included an estimate on what it would cost for the design level engineering that would be needed, permitting that would be needed. We tried to include all the costs so you have a full picture of what it would be as you move ahead. And all total, it came out to be about $9 million in improvements to deal with all the areas. And they're broken apart, and you can see that there's a few of those that if it's just ditches, that might be something that you could do with city resources. And then you see that the 4th and 8th Street, the way it's grouped, is close to $3 million. It's obviously we have to make some tough decisions about funding and prioritization. And with that, I'll pause. That's the material we put together. Happy to answer any questions with it. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that you were to do like piping and then drainage ditches. What was the decision to put drainage ditches in versus pipe? Because one of the big reasons people tend to drive or fall into them, and they do create mosquitoes, and of course they're not as pretty as the covered drainage system, I would think. So.
Well, you know, if the covered drainage system's covered in grass, it looks good too. But it's really about price, and then also, do you really need to put a pipe in just to move the water off the street? Sometimes a small ditch. It's a solution when you need a smaller solution. You can't put a 6-inch pipe in, and so we try to use ditches where there's a smaller amount of water that needs to move forward.
Have you figured out like what the sea level, the buildings that are in jeopardy because of sea level rise, does increased drainage help reduce those numbers or mitigate those numbers at all?
No, that would not. Those numbers were, it was a simple exercise where the water's here now, the scientists say another foot, another 2 feet. It's really about the topography of the beach here. It's two problems together, honestly. Yes, ma'am.
When you look at the project, do you see this as one significant project, or could it be phased in?
It was intended to be presented so that it could be phased. Even the 4th Street to 8th Street or Center Street project, where there's a lot in there, we had to model it as a whole system. You could do the improvements in pieces as you had the funding or you acquired funding. It does not have to be done as a $9 million project.
Do you have a recommendation for the phases?
We did not prepare that.
We didn't do prioritization. We gave, this is a high level study, but if, I mean, there's obviously ways that you can pick apart these areas and look at the most critical and say, this is what you tackle first, this second, and this third. And there's ways to do that.
Thank you.
That becomes a tougher problem because you have to answer to the citizen that didn't get an improvement. So and there's a lot more that goes into making that decision and having a good backup and defense for it.
Thank you.
I got a question about your final cost. Is that supposed to be 8.6 billion or 8.6 million?
It's there's a decimal.
There is, yeah.
The size
Makes you feel a lot better.
We rounded up for safety. There is contingency cost, which is typical of any construction project. We went ahead and included that. And we did a little rounding. We didn't want to tell you that it was a $2.4653 million estimate. We went ahead and moved it to 2.5 because material costs changed, labor costs changed, especially considering it's been a couple of years since we put the numbers together.
Is the cost of, you said this isn't an all-encompassing study that we need to turn in to get the project done. Is a future study cost included in those projects?
Yes. The way we put it together was thinking about we would hire an engineering firm to go get the survey, look for utility conflicts, et cetera, draw the plan sheets. We put an estimate for the cost of that as well as an estimate for getting permitting as well.
The ditches that you proposed, would they be on one side of the street, both sides of the street? Or
They're on one side typically. It's a one-side solution. Some of the systems, we have to put a solution on the other side of the street of the existing one because it's there's enough water there, but no, we weren't proposing to try to ditch all sides everywhere.
Okay. And how about, have we attempted to quantify the loss of roadside parking where ditches would be placed that don't currently
Yeah,
exist?
we did not take that into consideration. Obviously, that is a huge, economic driver. But we didn't really take that into consideration with regard to a solution. So, you know, that's where you're gonna have to kind of think about what's more important. Getting rid of the water or parking.
Well, that's where the city would have to work with the state and the county too, depending on who owns the road. Because we can't just go in there and put it in a ditch without
Exactly.
working with them and getting their permission.
Correct.
Any other questions?
Yes, I got one. Could you put a pervious concrete, like in a French drain, so that people could park?
That's
Or
one of
something like
the,
that?
that's one of the recommendations. that's
Yeah, it's
set
one of
forth.
the green infrastructure, LID recommendations.
And walkways, like in the business district primarily, I'm thinking.
Absolutely, a lot of beach towns and even some towns inland have started doing that. It's large parking areas.
Yeah.
Even some towns have started doing it instead of paved driveways, which you don't really have.
Yeah, I've got that.
Yeah, but, yeah.
It looks good and it works.
It's in the long term, you do have to do some maintenance on it, but it really does work well. You have a couple of problems. It's a southern community, so there's a lot of rain that comes down. You have a lot of rooftops. Everything adds up with additional water, and then it's pretty flat, or it's hammocked in between the old dune structures.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this time, we'll go into executive session. We gotta have a vote for that. We're actually gonna get to use the new conference room out that door to the right. We'll be back in a few minutes. And to talk about some personnel issues around a new clerk.